and 1/3 of these satellites, these were a handful of satellites, were taken out by this EMP. You can argue if I don't have dependency on space assets because I'm not so strong anymore, such as Russia are in space, then they have less to lose, but still the effect is high enough. Or dogfighting, that's a term that was that's known from the Air Force people for fighting in air, but we also see that now in space.
Welcome again, dear strategist, and today, hello, dear Thorsten Griening, CEO of SpaceWatch Global. Very welcome, and could you shortly elaborate on what SpaceWatch is by definition?
Oh, thank you very much for the invitation to be guest in your show today. I'm Thorsten Griening from SpaceWatch Global, and I'm the CEO and publisher. And what is SpaceWatch? SpaceWatch is an information portal for everyone who is interested in geopolitical space activities. We are based out of Europe, and that makes us unique to give our independent perspective on our space and moderating. We have a website, a news feed, podcast, webinars. So everything that informs and entertains sometimes people when it comes to the very complex space sector.
You also feature a very interesting guest as military officials from different countries. You yourself started in IT and then later came into satellite communication and also did an MBA in space management, if I'm correct. So could you, for the start, maybe give us a certain overview over the global satellite fleets? For example, we all know the American GPS, for example, which was a military project and then got open to the public, but I think not everyone is aware that Europe, for example, has its own capacities in this. China as well. India is also active in the regarding deployment of satellites. By now, not even speaking of Russia, while especially with GPS in the Eastern Europe, we see many more problems with spoofing since 2022, for example. So could you give us a little rundown of the biggest players and their regarding capacities in GeoInt, for example? We recently saw in Venezuela, they over months, for example, tracked Mr. Maduro's habits, and it is an incremental component in many operations these days.
Sure, happy to do so, and to unmantle a bit this very complex set of questions that you brought in. When we talk about satellite fleets, you might have heard about the constellations or the mega constellations. That is one element that we are talking about. But we have to also distinguish between the different layers, literally layers in space. We have the LEO orbit, so low Earth orbit regime from Earth's atmosphere to 1,500 kilometers altitude. Then we have the MEO layer and middle orbit layer, and then we have the geostationary orbits, 36,000 kilometers away. In that level, 36,000 kilometers away, we have on the equatorial side, we have the broadcast TV satellites, usually also for communication purposes, but primarily we talk about broadcast satellites. That's where they came from. That's where satellite communication started with. Why are these satellites so far away? Because they are operating in a constant place in regards to the position on Earth where you are, because they're moving with the same speed like the Earth, or velocity like the Earth, and that's the reason that they are so far away. All satellites below, that's the regime, we will have a look at it, are not at the same position all the time. So they're moving around the Earth. relatively to our own position, always that. In the MEO layer, we have, for instance, the GNSS satellites. And GNSS, and I'm not using GPS here, stands for Global Satellite Navigation and Global Navigation Satellite Systems. So that way. And that includes GPS, the American version of it. It includes Galileo, the European, the EU-owned version of it. It includes Baidu, what is the name for the Chinese system, and GLONASS, what is the Russian positioning system. The Indian have their own one, but I can't recall the name. So forgive me for that. So, but these are just the systems. These are just the blue dots on your mobile phone when you go from A to B and say, okay, where am I? Put me on a map and then find a way from here to whatever location that is. With distance, not the leader, but the most known system is obviously GPS, what is used as an acronym for it as well. But Europe does not have to hide. We have with Galileo an absolute perfect system, and with Galileo PRS also an service for the forces, which is unbeatable at the moment. So, what constellations, what mega constellations do we have in space? So, and out of the currently, I think about 15,000 active satellites, 10,000 satellites belonging to Starlink, which is the communication system of SpaceX, of Elon Musk. They are, at the moment, the dominant player in this field. We have other mobile, internet broadband constellations like Project Kuiper, what is the Amazon system, which is about to be deployed, now rebranded in Amazon Leo. And we have the European OneWeb system, now owned by Eutelsat. But that's just the Western Hemisphere we talked about. We also have the Chinese Satnet, or Thousand Sails systems, with 10,000s of satellites in the final stage deployed. We have Lightspeed. It's a Telesat. It's a Canadian system with about 150 satellites. We have IRIS² in Europe, a system with also, I think, almost 300 satellites. And one system we shouldn't ignore is Rivada's Outernet system, private operator that is about to launch its own constellation also in space. These were just the communication, the big communication constellations. There are dozens more that play in here, but towards our timing, I'm focusing on those. So then we have the market of the D2D services, the direct-to-device, the satellite on your mobile services. And I'm not talking about now the using of the GNSS signal, the blue dot, as I mentioned before. I'm talking about satellite services for communication, for data communication, for phone calls. So there are two big players at the moment operating or are about to operate. One is AST Space Mobile with their Bluebird series. They just launched, I think, Bluebird 6 in this end of December, and they have huge antennas to cover these the services. And then we have Link, another American constellation with 30 plus satellites. Then we have the entire IoT market. IoT satellites or services for an IoT service satellites for IoT market are CubeSats. 3U, 6U, 16U satellites. U is a definition of 10 by 10 by 10 centimeter. So a 1U satellite is like a cube with 10 centimeter on each side, and then 16U is then usually a 4 by 4 satellite. However, IoT satellites are narrowband communication satellites for purpose like Iridium's L-band satellite for maritime aviation, or say IoT devices on Earth. Then we have Globalstar, also for tracking systems and so on. Then the next constellations are Earth observation satellites. A huge field. Earth observation, we have to distinguish between optical and radar. So optical satellites, electromagnetical satellites, and radar SAR satellites, synthetic aperture radar satellites. So we have companies like Planet with 300 satellites. We have on the optical side, Germany started with their.
The thing is that we can basically tell to the audience that Germany, for example, the Bundeswehr, has about a dozen and is also regarding very sophisticated plans for the future at the moment.
I was about to talk about the first constellation of 5 satellites that Germany run, and I forgot the name of this, because they were acquired by Planet or by Black Skies, and then by Planet.
Okay.
And I forgot this name. So Germany was really leading in this area. We have Capella and an Eye on the SAR side. We have Black Sky and so on. So that's a huge market. So whereas Germany standing in that domain, Germany's military has at the moment 2 geostationary communication satellites. A third one is on its way to be launched. Then we have a few SAR satellites. SAR-Lupe 1 was a constellation of, I think, 5 or 6 SAR satellites. And we have now SARA, which is a small constellation of 3 satellites for higher resolution. So that's where Germany is very, very strong. Germany doesn't have its own communication satellites or private satellites. We do have filed satellites for Germany in the meantime from smaller operators, but I think Germany is a player in this field. So what the Bundeswehr is planning, I think that's very interesting, is to use all of the services above. You might have heard about the joint venture between Rheinmetall and ICEYE, Noise, to build military-grade SAR satellites. That would be one element of the new constellation, of the new architecture the Bundeswehr is about to pursue. Because the Minister of Defense, Boris Pistorius, announced in the satellite conference in Berlin last September the 35 billion spending in space defense, and that includes a new architecture of satellites, including ISR, so including communication satellites, including SDA, what stands for Space Domain Awareness, and all of the above, including missile warning and so on and so forth. So that is a very short answer, even though it was a long one, to your questions. What constellation do we have at the moment in space?
You also led some very interesting talks regarding officials from the army recently. We will see to that we link some of them in the description later. And as we quite neatly already made the bridge into warfare in space. So you already mentioned that cyber is of course a great component, but I think many people most likely might have been in contact with it so far during the Space Force episodes, or a series for Netflix, for example, where we see the regarding Chinese satellite clipping off the solar panels of the American one. But also recently there were some concerns that some countries might now basically build some shotguns, and therefore on later we will move on to the Kessler syndrome in these regards. So which more momentary capabilities are there to engage in in warfare in the regarding realm of satellites, and especially what negative effects might be seen there once we deploy actual kinetic actions to this.
When we talk about warfare in space, I would like to point to one of the professors from the Durham University, Blair and Bone, who has published a number of books on its original Sin and War in Space once, and I had the pleasure to interview Blair in for a 2025 review recently in one of the Space Cafe radios. So it's not a military person. And I did have the pleasure to talk with many space commanders from around the world in the last year. So he's an academic like Antje Nötzold, to discuss how space or how war in space can look like. And it is not the Star Wars laser duel scenario that we are talking here about. It is about the, I would say, the information domain. Because why is space now the fifth operational domain declared by NATO? In a conflict, what is important? It's information. Who sees what first? We just talked about Earth observation. We talked about SIGINT. We talked about early warning. So you need sensors in space. So to see what's going on Earth. Then communication. So how can I communicate in a secured way? And that goes for SATCOM, but also for data links, for weapon systems. And we talk about precision and timing. So how precise can I guide my troops or my weapons? So, and these are the assets and the services that are provided in space. And to take them out, that is one of the goals of war in space. Talk about also the counter-space activities and so on. But let's drill down to what is possible today. So, and we talk about primarily non-kinetic effects. Why non-kinetic? You mentioned the Kessler syndrome. What is the effect of an uncontrolled domino effect of parts of parts that affect others in space? So, non-kinetic. We talk about electromagnetic warfare here, and that is jamming and spoofing. So jamming is that you overlay signals on the uplink, on the downlink, on the GNSS side. You talked about GPS or spamming in the Baltic before. That is effects that we see actively done from Earth, but they also can be done in space. Spoofing, it's the false signaling that information get manipulated. So that's not that you know where you are. These are activities. Then cyber is an important element. So in that, but it's more on the ground station level. So how to secure my ground station? How do I have access to that? Because it's much more easier to affect a ground station than a satellite in space while flying. The third element I would say in that domain is direct energy, dazzling, lasers or high energy effects. You can blind or degrade optics in satellites. These are usually temporary effects, but if the intensity is high enough, then it can be also an permanent one. But all of them, they does not result in new debris in space, and that's very, very important. Also, Germany is going for some offensive space capabilities because what the general told me. It's nice to have a shield, but you need a sword to give a clear signal of deterrence to your adversary. And that's what we do, what we're looking for. And that can be in the electromagnetic field, but it can be also, and that's the next effect, the in-orbit maneuvers. So RPOs, rendezvous and proximity operations, that I can do co-orbital activities. So I fly with your satellites. We have seen that in the geo belt by the Russian Luk satellite, that is jumping from one satellite to the next one to hang around and listen in. Or, I mean, it's non-aggressive behavior, but you know that something goes on. So, and that is something that in the LEO regime we also see as dogfighting. That's a term that was that's known from the Air Force people for fighting in air, but we also see that now in space to rendezvous with satellites or being near enough to also manipulate them. And that's where then robotics comes in. So if your satellite has an arm, then you can dock, you can grab the satellite, you can manipulate the satellite, you can clip off the solar panels, as you mentioned before, but you just can bring him to another orbit or to push him to tumble. Yeah, or in the best case, if we look for the civil applications, then or peaceful applications, then you refuel your satellite or you deorbit your satellite, and these are activities that we are working on. So far, there was no active debris removal. It was discussed. It is planned by satellites like Astroscale or ClearSpace in Europe, but none of them came beyond a demonstrator mission. So we haven't seen big satellites being actively deorbited by a third party. So, and I think that's a huge field for the future. So then the third part is the ASAT, the anti-satellite tests, which are banned because they generate this orbital debris. These are the areas where we see war in space. And when we talk about the ultimate solution, our nuclear activities in space, first and foremost with an EMP, then you have such a huge effect on everyone in space that is not foreseeable that a country would do that today, because they're affected on their own as well. So, and you can argue if I don't have the dependency on space assets because I'm not so strong anymore, such as Russia are in space, then they have less to lose, but still the effect is high enough for each and everyone. And I mean, it will kick us all back into a digital stone age. And I'm talking about the 70s now. So
Yeah, but it was very relieving when you basically said so in the German talk we had before, when I was referring to our regarding episode on the changes in Russian nuclear doctrine. And yeah, the good news is not every artillery system getting its own little boy designated anymore, but also, even if there would be the possibility and it might be highly effective, it would very likely destroy everyone's space assets, and then we really have to talk about a magnitude of desperation that is just not there gladly to a very foreseeable future, and hopefully never gets reached, however conflicts might unfold. So that is a very positive note from my view, because so far, basically, yeah, it's going on in the internet, and you can see enough data for this. For example, okay, you take 1 megaton and over Central Europe, and zack, Central Europe is in the Stone Age, as you said. Because, yeah, if you are on your last leg, that might be convenient, but then we are not talking about conquest anymore, because what is there to conquer except for empty building and not functional? And if one is then even destroying their own space assets, yeah, that is really a kind of mutually ensured destruction that should be relieving to most people, I think. Yeah.
And I would say there are not a lot of data at the moment out what are impacts that we would see with an EMP or with a nuclear explosion in space, because the last tests that has been done happened in the early 70s. So our particular Starfish Prime was a US test in 1962. 400-kilometer altitude. That is where the ISS is flying today. And that was a 1.4 megaton explosion. And it was a huge EMP, and even had effects on Earth, or in that case, over Hawaii. Even it was 1,500 kilometers away. And 62, we just have to recall, the space era started in 57. So that was very early with less satellites are in space. I mean, there were just the Russian and the American satellites in space. I'm not aware of any other third country that launched satellites in that early phase. And 1/3 of these satellites, these were a handful of satellites, were taken out by this EMP. And we have to understand what is an effect in space when you detonate a nuclear weapon. You don't have the pressure, because you don't have air. So that's not what causes the effect. You don't have a nuclear mushroom there, because you don't have material to move, but you have a very, very, very high and aggressive radiation. And that takes out, with the EMP, the electronics over huge distances. I mean, nothing holds a radiation wave back, because the radiation that we see today, like in form of a material in the polar lights, in the aurora borealis, they're coming from the sun. So that's material that is erupted at the sun and traveled the sun. I mean, 1 light year, with other words, the distance from the sun to Earth. And I can imagine that everything what is in an seeable horizon will be affected by an EMP. So, and then there was another test by the Americans, Operation Fishbowl, also in a higher atmosphere, and in the same time frame we had the Russians that tested EMPs on satellites as well. But since then, no one has done it, because they all understood it is not good for anyone. It's also banned in the Outer Space Treaty, which was signed 67. So thereafter, that explicitly nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destructions are prohibited to be placed in space. So, and so far, all countries are adhering to the rules and guidelines. We have today more different discussion in this field, that is the behavior that I'm showing in space. It's not the capability, it's not the asset that I have, it's the behavior. Because the good old saying says that even my Coke can or my beer can be a weapon if I'm accelerating it fast enough and I hit you on the right side. Yeah. So everything can be a weapon. So what does it mean for my civil satellites? What does it mean for any asset that I have in space if I'm moving around the wrong direction, if I'm becoming too close to you? So, and these behaviors are discussed. There is a UN initiative, I think initiated by the UK, the open-ended working group on the behaviors in outer space. And we see and that's under the umbrella of UNIDIR, the United Nations Institute for Disarmament, where space belongs to. And we see some very heated discussions. Initiatives by the Russians are first placements of weapons, which is denied by the Americans. The Americans say the Russians don't behave and they're not transparent, and so on and so forth. We see the entire geopolitical conversations also in space these days.
Yeah, exactly, and it is ever rising tensions, and you never know who might get desperate, and basically game theory, glad about the mutually assured destruction aspect, because that is some kind of equilibrium effect basically there, but you never know who might get ideas, because you never know. Russia is already rapidly declining demographically, and a very diverse country which could fracture. There are not all nuclear missiles exclusively in Belarus and in in Moscow, for example. You could have other radicals in other places of the earth, and but it's, as said, quite relieving basically to hear so in these regards. And one more thing regarding the proximity, you also mentioned that recently China was basically demonstrating these dogfight capabilities, as the Americans at least have not yet shown to have or demonstrated to have, which is not always a guarantee factor for not having it.
Yeah, but the point is you can't do things in space without be seen. I mean, okay, fair point. You have to look at the in the right direction to see something happen. So, and not so many countries have the capabilities to do that really on the entire sphere. However, what we would call as dogfighting, and the Chinese have demonstrated, is a refueling process in space, in the geo belt, and release of a smaller satellite from a satellite, and to come back, inspect some other satellites, coming back, or flying around or another satellite. So these are capabilities that China demonstrated, and the US are alarming to that, because they don't have these at the moment, or they don't have shown these capabilities right now. However, we have seen with two, I think Lockheed Martin or Raytheon missions with the MEV-2 that in-orbit servicing happened. These were missions on the geo belt that, with a small satellite, they docked and put external propulsion on it. They're not refueled the satellite, because they came with their own propulsion to guide and steer the satellite.
Which is a highly complex process because of the regarding velocities or speeds we are talking about. Maybe to, if it interests some of the regarding viewers, could you give us a little wrap up at least about these problematics in regarding of coordination, and also which limited capabilities there are to actually repositioning and fuel or accelerate satellites, to which in which regards there are possibilities there, especially when you said there were some basic demonstrations of clearing debris, but it's also not really, it didn't go any further so far.
Yeah, because it all depends on your maneuverability in space and the ability to dock to an unknown object. So it can be a cooperative object, and you know the flight pattern, you know the how the structure is, you know where to dock, or it can be an uncooperative spacecraft that is stumbling. So how to stop a tumbling satellite? A good one was Gravity. A good Hollywood movie was Gravity, where you saw what happens, and that was the demonstration of the Kessler effect about this tumbling stuff. So it has such a high energy that it is hard to stop it, because as you know, energy is not lost, so it will be then transformed to something else. So you have to, and there are different methods. So one is to simulate the tumbling, so to tumble with the satellite, then to dock, and then to stop it. But it's not just a prediction. You have to do it in space, and it's far away. So we talk about an algorithm that is that can perform all of that autonomously without you, and it's a hard thing. Space is hard, and so that's why we haven't seen it. And over the last years, there were honestly a limited funding for space activities. That changed globally, and with the new American doctrine, with doubling the military spending, that will have an impact on space activities as well. So for each and everyone. So, but here in Europe, I mean, it's not just on the space side. I mean, the entire forces can sing their song from the last 20 years of degrading their services and the support that came into it. That changed dramatically with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and our very loud wake-up call for us to say, hey, we better have to do something. And the signs of our Chancellor Merz in his opening speech to say he wants to rebuild the German armed forces as the strongest conventional armed forces again in Europe. It's a good sign, and our neighbors also appreciate Germany's activities in that field.
Into these regards, and especially what has already been found in the regarding efficiency of Sondervermögen, special funding in regards of infrastructure already, plus other challenges we see, I will come to again in a regarding predictions episode in the coming future, and will continue covering this. For now, thank you very much again for your time, for these intriguing elaborations. And yeah, once we see some significant developments, we may find each other again, I hope.
Absolutely. And one last word on what I just mentioned. Few of the listeners would say, but Germany has a history. Yes, we do have, without any doubt. I can recommend an episode I've done with General Badia on that, who very clear said we have to overcome that because it's needed for all of us, for security and safety.
I have friends, colleagues, comrades from all over the world who are telling me so, Jewish friends who are literally annoyed when one gets apologetic and everything. Could dive deeper into this. I would really say we have changed, and as I also stressed in a regarding interview with General Schneiderhan on the Operation Valkyrie from the Second World War, there's a reason why I think it's still uniquely that in Germany a soldier can say, out of reasons of my own conscience, I cannot follow this order.
No.
Thank you very much. See you soon again. Keep in contact.
Bye.
Take care.